Hello, everybody. This is Professor MCAL again. Thank you for tuning in. We have a presentation today about the first cities in the world. This will likely be a two-part presentation. This one's going to be kind of short and sweet because it is such a big topic. There's a lot to absorb. I also want to thank everybody that has subscribed to this page. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to do these presentations, and I'm going to keep bringing you material as often as I can. So the first cities in the world. It is hard to imagine a time where there were no cities in the world because we are so developed worldwide today. We have many, many cities that are just exceedingly populated. It was not always like this. For most of us, myself included, it's almost impossible to imagine a world where there was no focal point or a centralized point where you could go for food or shelter or whatever. So we're kind of starting before commerce actually took place. First cities in the world. Many of you know about Mesopotamia from grade school. It's something that I do teach about quite often. It is the earliest known civilization. It translates to the land between the rivers. The two rivers I am referring to, of course, are the Tigris and the Euphrates. Back then, the big city in this area was called Uruk. Today it is called Iraq. That is how old the city of Iraq is. The city of Iraq could be pinpointed as really the first major city in the world, although there is some activity in the Indus River Valley in India at this time as well. But traditionally, when we start Western civilization, we're going to start around the Sumerians, who were the same as Iraqis, basically. Southern Mesopotamia was known as Sumer. The Sumerians were the earliest known civilization responsible for gifting to us a writing system, a phonetic system, the wheel, the preliminary theory of mathematics, numbers, etc., and so forth. Everything really evolves from here. The places or countries in the world where the first cities started are still contested today by elite power. There are certain areas in the world, and I've talked about this before, particularly around the Mediterranean, that if you control certain areas in that region, then you will control the world. And back in the days before the world was really developed and commerce was beginning, there was a lot of tit for tat or fighting or back and forth, trying to find out who was going to control the flow of commerce or the flow of goods in the world. As I have mentioned in previous presentations, the people that were responsible for building the first cities are the same people that are in control of the world today. A little bit more about Sumer. Uruk and Eridu are among the first cities in the world. Within the region of Sumer, that's around Iraq today, the wheel. Cuneiform was gifted to us by the Sumerians as well. They gave the human race its preliminary understanding of mathematics and astrology. All astronomy, astrology is all based on things that were discovered or created by the ancient Iraqis. Other very early cities. So I talked about Canaan at length in my Cult of the Bull presentation. The area that is now Israel, Palestine, Jordan, also Syria, was once known as Canaan. And as I have talked about, the Canaanites gained control of commerce in that area back then. And I believe that they are still in control of commerce today. We talked about how the Canaanites are descendants of Cain and Abel from the Bible, that they actually believe that they are descendants of the snake in the garden rather than God. These people still have control of global commerce. Today, this region gave rise also to another civilization called Phoenicia. That's where we get our word phonetic, is from the Phoenicians. So the Canaanites were around the area of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, right next to the Mediterranean. So anything that was going from the Orient or the Middle East onto the Mediterranean for sale or distribution had to go through this area. This area was dominated by the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians later were able to spread their religion, which is a dark pagan religion based on Baal worship, child sacrifice, human sacrifice, etc. Their focal point, their major city, was Carthage, which is now in Tunisia. So if you are a history buff, if you know about the Roman Empire, if you hear about the Carthaginians were the Phoenicians. And if you know anything about ancient Roman history, you'll know that the Carthaginians were the nemesis of Rome. The Phoenicians are responsible for much of the culture of the North African coast. So the people that have inherited the culture of the Phoenicians and also the culture of Islam that swept through North Africa much later are the countries in the northern continent, which are left to right. What's all the way to the left underneath Spain? Morocco, and then I believe next to that, is Algeria. Next to that is Libya, and then Egypt right next door to that, I believe. In the ancient world, all of North Africa was referred to as Libya. Just want to reiterate that this culture is sprinkled around the Mediterranean Sea. There is a map that I used in my Cult of the Bull presentation to mark kind of where the Phoenicians settled. These people competed very, very hard to control commerce in this area. And as I said before, I believe that the descendants of the Canaanites still control commerce today. Phoenicians continued. Phoenician religious practices were influential in their colonies around the Mediterranean. So after the Roman Empire invaded Carthage or took control of North Africa, their religious practices and beliefs were absorbed into the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is very interesting because you have what the Romans themselves believed, and then within the bounds of the empire were many different peoples with many different ethnicities, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and religious traditions. These traditions all were absorbed and coalesced into ancient Rome. Many of them were absorbed into the papacy later on as well. They all contributed to the culture of Rome. The Phoenician colony of Carthage was adversarial to the Roman Empire and is going to be the biggest problem for them over time. But the Phoenicians never really went away. And even before that, the Canaanites never really went away. They're still around today. If you want more information on that, you can see the Cult of the Bull presentation, part 1. Other very early cities. Now we're talking biblical a little bit here. Jericho. They have the name in Arabic there as well. Ariah, I believe. This town is located on the West Bank, where Palestine is today. Jericho is one of the earliest continuous settlements in the world, dating perhaps from about 9,000 BC, which is roughly 11,000 years ago. Recent excavations demonstrate their lengthy history. It provides evidence of the first steps of development of permanent settlements and thus the first steps towards civilization. And I've said this before, but I want to also reiterate that the first permanent structure ever built in the world, permanent structure. There were structures before this one. I'm referring, of course, to the Kaaba at Mecca. There were other structures before the Kaaba, but they were not permanent. The Kaaba is the first permanent structure in the history of humankind. It is exceedingly old. It dates back to the time of Abraham, thousands of years before the year zero. Even before Jericho itself, many believe. And we'll move on from here. Okay, here is Jericho as it stands today. One of the groundbreakers of civilization, commerce, the cultivation of food, and the domestication of animals. Now, I want to point out that the people that were able to domesticate animals and raise crops, the earliest, are the people that were able to be the most successful in the ancient world. If you had control over animals, you had control over the growth of food, then you had power. That's the bottom line. You control the food supply. It's the same thing today. If you have your arms around, the food system, then you have a heck of a lot of power. And this was the case in the early cities. I read a history of the world once, and it was about as thick as a phone book. I mean, it was really a big book. And Semitic peoples, that is ethnically Jewish people, came in on page 4. So these people domesticated animals before anybody and got their arms around the food supply situation right from early on. We have the Assyrians. The Assyrians today are concentrated in what is now Syria. The Assyrians are named after the star Sirius, the dog star, just like Syria today is named after Sirius. This state was forged out of war, invasion, conquest. This is when violence and the law of the jungle, which is might equals right, really started to come onto the world stage. The upper landholding classes, like I was just talking about, consisted of military commanders who grew wealthy from the spoils taken in war. This is when what we came to know later as the feudal system kind of started. If you had animals, if you had food, if you had land, then you were in good shape. And if you wanted to survive and have a family and, have a bloodline that was going to keep going on this planet, you had to get some land. You had to be able to settle. This was worth fighting for in the ancient world, and people certainly did. The Assyrians were the largest standing army ever seen in the Middle East and the Mediterranean at this time. This is way before ancient Rome. The Assyrian Empire would have encompassed, I believe, Turkey, much of what is now Iraq, Syria, and then again the coast of the Mediterranean there in the east, Judea, Palestine, Jordan, etc., and so forth. Iron swords, lances, metal armor, and battering rams were all developed by the Assyrians. There was also major leaps made by other civilizations at the time, but these were some of the first people that started using plated armor and iron to do battle. Later on, it got a little bit more fancy in the Roman Empire. You started decorating your weapons and so forth. The Romans would actually use battering rams that had a literal head of a ram on the end, a carving of the head of a ram. Here we go. We have a map of the Assyrian Empire at its height. So it does encompass Turkey, some of southern Asia. Looks like it is covering Iraq, making its way into Iran as well. And then Syria, Israel, and Jordan, and then Egypt, of course. The Arabian Peninsula is very, very interesting. As you can see, it's almost entirely passed over. And I do talk to my students about this. I ask them, why would these civilizations, these great civilizations like the Assyrians, and then much later, Alexander the Great, pass over Arabia? And the answer is that there was nothing there at the time. There was nothing to conquer. It was nothing but desert. There were no real cities established. So going into the Arabian desert was basically a death sentence. So that is a little bit about the Assyrians. This is when civilization really starts to get kicked off. In addition, as I've talked about before, the ancient world is made up of cults. The cult of Dionysus, the cult of Isis, the cult of Sybil, so on and so forth. And Arabia was no exception to this. Arabia was very tribal, nomadic, and very cliquey. So things did not come together as far as being able to form cities and long-term settlements on the Arabian Peninsula for a very, very long time. This is one of the reasons that today Saudi Arabia is a very isolated community in the world, and it is also exceedingly different, almost from every other country in the world as well. It is one of the most oppressive places in the world, and that is not an opinion. That is a fact. In modern Saudi Arabia, I think women were given the right to drive cars in 2017, although you are still not allowed to leave your house in Saudi Arabia if you're a female without a male escort. It does not matter if that male is your grandfather or your 9-year-old son. As long as you have a male with you, that's fine. Part of the reason for this is some of the archaic traditions of early Islam, which are born out of, the ancient world, just like every other religion, and the high degree of isolation of the Arabs as well. It was a very, very isolated place for a very long time, and it is. You can see today, the effects of isolation on the ideologies of the region. So Babylon. It's hard to estimate where that area is exactly today. It really is the country of Iraq. Now, Babylon is really the first very, very successful civilizations. One of the seven wonders of the ancient world were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Iraq was not a desert at this time. It was very fertile. You could grow food there. There was a lot of water. And it was exceedingly beautiful. Now, this is over the course of thousands of years of cultivation, of buildings, of gold, of conquests, etc., that Babylon came to rise to be such an important power. Why has Iraq had been so contested throughout history? It is still heavily, heavily contested today. And as I've said before, this is the first city in the world. It's so ancient that, whoever goes to places like this and makes discoveries about ancient history that could potentially fill in gaps or rewrite history are the people that are going to have the power to write history in the way that they see fit. If you control this region, you control the world. That's the bottom line. Yeah, what can we learn about history in the state of the world by learning about Babylon? It's a very interesting question. I do ask my students. There's no real right answer for this. This is more of an opinion. There is not any one fact that's going to, tell you the whole story about this. But I would say, in my professional opinion, I think that the Babylonians were so successful that they were a civilization that people wanted to copy and that people learned from. The Babylonians lasted for a very, very long time. It was over 1,000 years, 2,000 years. It was, one of the gems of the ancient world. But we can learn about other cities of the ancient world and why they're so contested once we know about the people that founded these cities and the things that, the things that are there. Okay, so here is what archaeologists today, now I'm no archaeologist, but I do follow what's going on in academic circles as far as archaeological discoveries and the leading theories and stuff like that. It is beginning to look like, it is not a fact yet that I know of, all right? If anybody knows any more about this, about Göbekli Tepe or recent research, please leave something in the comments. I'd love to talk about it. Göbekli Tepe is quickly emerging as the oldest city in the world. Now, that is not a fact yet, but that is the opinion of a lot of cultural anthropologists, archaeologists, etc. This is I believe, in southwestern Turkey. Turkey is an exceedingly complex place that has had so much history running through it. It is just incredible. It's an incredible place. I've been there a few times myself. It's wonderful. Göbekli Tepe. This is an ancient depiction. This is a depiction of what it would have been like in the ancient world while they were still building. All right. This is a pretty recent discovery. I think Göbekli Tepe was actually discovered. I could be wrong. I could be wrong about this. I don't know the exact date, but it's within the last 20 years. I think it was in the early 2000s, 2006, 70, somewhere in there, that Göbekli Tepe was actually discovered. I mean, this has been buried by, time and dust for a long time, to quote one of my favorite bands, Mayhem, of course, buried by time and dust. But in this case, it's quite literally buried by time and dust. This was just recently found. This has been hidden from us for a long time, throughout all of the time that people have been writing history down. I mean, there's really nothing in any historical record that I've ever seen that notes this place we know very, very little about, Göbekli Tepe. Here's a picture of what it looks like today. There it is today. This is in southwestern Turkey. It's incredibly old, but some of it is still standing. Some of it is still standing up. And one of the reasons for that is because it was much more important in the ancient world when you built something or when you did something, you did it for all time. Your perception of what life was and how the world worked and what existence was would be totally different from what ours is now. When people did something back then, they did it for permanence. They were going for, the historical record, basically. Now, we have... where I live and where, most people in the world live, I'd say, maybe not most, but a lot of people in the world, we have houses, homes, buildings that are built out of, bricks, cinder blocks, etc., which are great. And they offer us many amenities and conveniences like indoor plumbing, stovetops, microwaves, computers, everything, all entertainment, stuff like that. But these structures are not built to last the way that Göbekli Tepe was, or the pyramids were, or something like that. I seriously doubt that most of the structures that are standing today in suburban neighborhoods in the United States or in Europe or, or South Africa, wherever, I seriously doubt that most of these structures will be standing in 500 years. They're just not built to last. They are built for the purpose of obtaining money, perpetuating your ability to sustain yourself, which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we are not building things today as far as housing that are going to be permanent like they did in the ancient world. We have not, exceeded the achievements of the ancient world. And I think that's illustrated in this image here. What about the pyramids? So you might be thinking, where do the pyramids fit in to all of this? And the accepted theory in Egyptology is that the pyramids are approximately 5,000 years old. Not even that. I want to say let's say 4. I'm not an Egyptologist either, but I believe it's about 4 or maybe a little bit more when the construction of the pyramids began. Again, if somebody knows a little bit more about that subject, you want to talk about it, you want to enlighten me a little bit, please feel free to do so. I'm eager to hear from people. That is the generally accepted theory in Egyptology. Now, Egyptology, like many other academic fields, has a structure to it. It has a overarching framework that you have got to accept if you want to work in the field. There are people, many scholars out there now, Graham Hancock would be one of them for sure, that are asserting things about the pyramids that just do not fit into the historical narrative, the narrative of Western civilization. That is the narrative of that you find in all your textbooks in school. There was a study done pretty recently about the Sphinx, and there is significant evidence to support that has been confirmed by professionals that know about water erosion and the effects of water over time on rock, on stone, etc., that have confirmed that it is definitely for sure that the Sphinx at one time was at least partially submerged underwater, which is very interesting because I've talked about the deluge before, the deluge being the flood of, it's recorded in the Bible, the flood of Noah. It's recorded in the Upanishads and the Indian Vedas. It's recorded in the Quran as well. This was a event that really happened. The Great Flood, as we know it, this really happened. So if the Great Flood was 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, which is generally, it is actually older than that. Let's say about 10,000 BC. So this would be 12,000 years ago. The Sphinx would have had to have been submerged underneath water after this event. So the question is that if the Sphinx was submerged underneath water after this event, that would make the Sphinx much older by thousands of years, because the water would have had to gone away before the Sphinx could have been built. But it is looking like the Sphinx was standing before the deluge, before the flood. That means that the Sphinx and the pyramids are likely older than 10,000 BC. In my opinion, I think that the pyramids are more like 30,000 years old. We can speculate all day on what the pyramids were for. I think that they were a multifaceted structure that allowed for, I don't know, possibly the spiritual transportation or transformation of people. We don't know still today. One interesting thing I want to point out: the big pyramid in the middle there, the pyramid of Khufu. If you can look closely, you'll see that there seems to be a cap on top of the pyramid. Right. This is because the limestone that was on the rest of the pyramid of Khufu was chipped away in order to build the city of Cairo. The original city of Cairo was built out of the limestone that they took off of the pyramid of Khufu. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of an idea of how big this structure is. You could actually take a layer off of it and build a city. That's how big it is. It's just enormous. I've never been to the pyramids, but I have seen images of people walking or standing. There's actually a person in this picture here, and they look like an ant next to these monumental structures here. There are many pyramids in Egypt. These are not the only ones. There's many. There's over 200 pyramids in Egypt. There's also, as we know, pyramids in South America. There are pyramids in China as well. They don't talk about them at all. It's not generally far spread knowledge that there are pyramids in China, but there are. So that raises many, many questions as well about the possibility of a lost civilization having gone down in the deluge. Perhaps Atlantis. Perhaps this is where Atlantis fits in. In my opinion, in closing, I will say that I think that there is serious gaps in the historical record about the continuity of these civilizations. I think that it's highly possible and probable that there was a civilization here that was spiritually advanced and technologically advanced in some ways as well, that we just do not know about. Or if there are people that know about it, they are keeping this information suppressed from the rest of us because, if people found out more about who they are and where they came from, you empowered them by doing so. If you can provide a narrative that's true or partially true while obscuring more important things, you can give people a picture of who they are that you want them to be. But the bottom line is that it is your birthright to know where you came from as a human being. I hope that this presentation has helped you do that and can implore you to try to further your knowledge on this subject. This is the end of the presentation for today. This one was kind of short and sweet. I hope you enjoyed this one. I enjoyed giving this presentation. Please subscribe to the channel. If you're interested, it really helps me when you do that. Again, I want to say thank you to everybody that has done that so far. I will also give a shout out to my esteemed colleague and very good friend, Master Mook, Mookie's Tarot Zone on YouTube. Check him out. You will like it very much. In the meantime, be well. Thank you for listening, and God bless you. Thank you for listening, guys.